Hand of the Necromancer by Brad Strickland, Chapter 4. The next day was Sunday. Johnny and his grandparents attended Mass at St. Michael's Church, and there they saw Professor Childermass, whose church attendance was spotty. After the service, Professor Childermass and the pastor, Father Thomas Higgins, walked back to the rectory together. Johnny decided to hang around for a while, and his grandparents went home without him. After a few minutes, the priest and the professor came outside again. They made an odd pair. Father Higgins was tall and muscular, with iron gray hair and a square, grizzled jaw. His dark, bushy eyebrows gave him a constant scowl, but in reality he was a kind, understanding man, and a brave one. He had served in the army during World War II and had been in the Philippines, where fighting was heavy. And as Johnny knew, the priest had also faced some wicked and dangerous supernatural foes, including ghosts, sorcerers, and zombies. Now he was deep in conversation with the professor. Johnny hesitated to interrupt, but Professor Childermass noticed him, gave a slight start, and beckoned him over. Johnny joined them at the corner of the church. "Hello, Johnny," Father Higgins said. "Roderick here was telling me about your unpleasant visitor, Mr. Murgle. And about Estrius Blackleech," added the professor. "In fact, I was asking Higgy if he would bless that wretched relic of a hand. Ever since I showed it to you, I've been having nasty dreams about it." The professor gave a little shiver. "In my dreams, I imagine it's come to life and is dragging itself around by the fingers. It creeps up my bedclothes and crawls to my pillows and clutches me by the throat." Professor Childermass put a hand to his throat and coughed. "I wake up choking, jump out of bed, and discover that the sinister statuette is locked exactly where I left it." "I told him to use it for kindling," said Father Higgins. "Hang it, Higgy," returned the professor. "It's almost 300 years old. I couldn't call myself a historian and run around burning up antiques like that." "Are you going to bless the hand, Father?" asked Johnny. Father Higgins shrugged. "I suppose, although I'm tempted to let it remain unblessed, if it's really needling Roderick's conscience. At least it got him to Mass, which is more than I've managed to do for a month." "Come over this afternoon, then," said Professor Childermass. "I'll expect you around 3. "Can I come too, Professor?" asked Johnny. "After all, this whole thing started because of me." Professor Childermass smiled. He liked Johnny Dixon immensely, because he felt that the lonely, brainy, timid young man was a great deal like he himself had been as a boy. "I don't see why not," he said. "Come on over, and we'll deal with the wizard's handiwork together." Johnny walked home, enjoying the warm sunshine and the bright, clear sky. But when he turned onto Fillmore Street, his heart thudded suddenly. A black and white police car was parked in front of his house. What terrible thing had happened? Johnny broke into a frantic run. He pounded across the front porch, opened the door, and found Grandma, Grandpa, and 2 policemen standing in the parlor. They looked up in surprise. I saw the police car," Johnny gasped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing here, Johnny," Grandma said. "Land sakes. You're white as a sheet. Don't worry, we're all right." Grandpa Dixon, a tall, stoop-shouldered old man with a wrinkled face and a bald, freckled head, made a tutting noise with his tongue. "Burglars, Johnny. Right here on Fillmore Street. Did you ever hear the likes of that in your life? Right in broad daylight, and on Sunday, too." Johnny had interrupted the story. He stood listening to the rest of it, piecing together what must have happened. Grandma and Grandpa had strolled home from Mass. As they neared their house, Grandma noticed something odd across the street. The professor was not back because his garage door was open, and his maroon Pontiac was not inside, yet a light burned in his study on the 2nd floor of his house. As she watched, that light went out, but then a light came on in the room next door. Grandpa had wanted to go over and see who was in there, but Grandma had insisted they call the police. A few minutes before the police car arrived, a man wearing a long black raincoat and a black hat pulled low over his face had come out of the professor's house and had hurried away. Grandpa tried to follow him, but his arthritis kept him from walking very fast, and the man disappeared around the corner of the next street. By the time Grandpa got back, the police had arrived, and then Johnny showed up. Johnny looked out the bay window just then and saw the professor driving up. The 2 policemen hurried across the street as the old man was putting his car away, and then the 3 went inside to the professor's house. Grandma put a protective hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Folks are getting awfully low," she said in a hurt voice. "Imagine, hardly anybody in Dustin Heights ever locks their door at night. But from now on, I guess we better start checking to make sure ours is locked." "What did the man look like, Grandpa?" Johnny asked. His grandfather sighed. Like a big black ghost, he said, with his raincoat collar turned up and that big floppy-brimmed hat like the Shadow used to wear on the covers of his books. He didn't give me a good look at the face, but he moved mighty fast, that's for sure. The Dixons had a troubled lunch. Grandma made tomato vegetable soup, and Grandpa made tall roast beef sandwiches, piling slices of homemade sourdough bread with beef, tomatoes, onions, and lettuce. The food was hearty, but no one talked much, and after they had finished, Johnny was glad to see the police pulling away from the curb. I'm going over to see the professor, he called and ran out the door. Professor Childermass, his face as dark as a thundercloud, was standing in his front doorway. Hello, he growled as Johnny hurried over. Welcome to Castle Childermass, the victim of a human earthquake. Once inside, Johnny saw what the professor meant. Everything was turned upside down. The sofa in the living room had been cut to shreds, with wads of stuffing erupting through long slashes. Books had been tumbled off shelves. The hall closet had been ransacked, with overcoats and fedoras and galoshes strewn everywhere. The kitchen was a wreck. Plates had been strewn around and broken. The oven was open, and the refrigerator emptied. Bottles of Tabasco sauce, ketchup, and milk had been thrown carelessly down, breaking and spilling. Lettuce and tomatoes lay squashed and trodden on the floor. Part of a baked chicken had been tossed into a corner, and other food lay here and there. Johnny swallowed. Professor, did he get the... No, Professor Childermass said shortly. The precious Mr. Murgle did not find the hand. Johnny blinked. Gosh, Professor, do you think it was really him? Who else? The professor lit one of his Balkan-so-brain cigarettes. Of course I will bet you dollars to donuts that the man has a perfect alibi, and no one except your grandparents seems to have noticed the villain. Oh, I wish I had been at home when he came calling. The professor spluttered as words failed him. He grabbed a plate from a heap jumbled on the white enameled table and smashed it to the floor. Then he hurled a saucer. He offered one to Johnny. Care to try your luck? Johnny shook his head. No, sir. Doesn't help anyway. He placed the saucer on the table. I am going to have to refurbish my house from scratch. Oh, that misbegotten miscreant will pay for this, mark my words. The doorbell rang, making them both jump. It was Father Higgins. When he came into the house, he stared around with wide, wondering eyes. Brusquely, Professor Childermass explained what had happened. He told Johnny and the priest to go up to his study. The hound did less damage there than elsewhere, the professor observed. I'll join you in a couple of shakes. When he and Father Higgins entered the study, Johnny saw what the professor meant. True, all the books had been tumbled out of the shelves, and the shelves themselves, made of bricks and boards, had been knocked apart. The stuffed owl had even been thrown off its round stand, and every drawer of the professor's desk had been pulled out and dumped on the floor. Still, since the study was never very tidy anyway, it didn't look all that bad. The professor came in, shaking his head and gripping the wooden hand. Here's the crackerjack prize that caused all this, Higgy. Take a whack at it and see what holy water and holy words can do. Father Higgins set the carved hand on the desk, sprinkled it with holy water, and recited a prayer of blessing. Nothing happened. There, said the priest with a sigh. I don't know if we've accomplished anything, Rod, but maybe that will keep this nasty, creepy crawler out of your nightmares. Now, I don't have anything much to do until evening mass, so if you want, I'll help pick up this place a little. Johnny joined in, and after a couple of hours, they had the downstairs rooms in fairly decent condition. The professor sighed over his kitchen. Baking was his favorite hobby, and although his cake pans, saucepans, and other cooking utensils were intact, he had hardly a cup, saucer, or plate to his name. They piled broken crockery into a big, battered old ash can. The police told me to give them a list of everything that is missing, he growled. I can't see that anything has been stolen, but I'm missing all of my dishes, my easy chair and sofa, and about half of my self-respect. I plan to be prepared if my visitor comes calling again. You take it easy, warned Father Higgins. You're no longer the spry boy who charged a machine gun nest single-handedly in the Battle of the Argonne Forest. The professor's eyes glittered behind his spectacles. No, but by heavens, I'm man enough to make a midnight marauder know he's been in a fight if he tangles with me. I think tomorrow I'll shop for furniture, then drive up to Durham, New Hampshire. My old friend Charlie Coote may have some advice on how to deal with that dratted wooden carving. Dr. Charles Coote was a specialist in the folklore of magic and sorcery, and he taught at the University of New Hampshire. Johnny knew and liked the old man, and he almost asked if he could go along, but then remembered he would have to report to the museum. Having a summer job had some drawbacks. That evening, Professor Childermass had dinner with the Dixons. Over a pot roast and mashed potatoes, the professor pretended to shrug off the burglary. He said it was probably just some homeless tramp looking for money kept in a sock or stuffed under a mattress. He kept telling Henry and Kate Dixon not to worry. "I've been thinking of redecorating for some time," he finished with a chuckle. "This hurries me along a little, that's all." Johnny saw Grandpa and Grandma exchange a worried look. They knew their bristly, foul-tempered neighbor very well, and they knew he was not acting like himself. But when Grandpa suggested that he might want to stay in the guest bedroom that night, the professor just shook his head. "Thank you, Henry, but I prefer my own little bed, rumpled and tossed though it may be. I shall be quite safe. My doors will be firmly locked, and I plan to have Brown Bess standing guard right at the head of my bed." Later, when the professor had returned home, Johnny asked Grandpa Dixon who Brown Bess was. The old man shook his head. "Well, Johnny, that's a kind of nickname. Years ago, the professor used to do some hunting before he decided that killing animals was cruel if you weren't going to eat the meat. But he still has his hunting rifle, a nifty World War I surplus Enfield. It's the same weapon he used to carry in the army. Because it was made in England, he used to call it Brown Bess, the same name the British gave their muskets during the American Revolution." Johnny swallowed. He did not know what kind of shot his old friend was, but he hoped there would be no opportunity for the professor to have to fire Brown Bess. And that's the end of Chapter 4.